This episode of Dear Culture Podcast is brought to you by the all-new Honda HR-V. Every creator is driven by a strong sense of curiosity, and the 2023 HR-V is ready for any path that the power of determination can lead to. With sleek exterior styling and a spacious interior, this SUV is a statement piece, made to keep up with the pace of your dynamic lifestyle. The all-new Honda HR-V. Learn more at thebestlookingrvever.com.
I definitely believe that she will be remembered by the tone of her voice and how unique it was. You can't discuss 90s music, not just R&B, 90s music without talking about Brandy. Because what she, along with Aaliyah and Monica, did was truly unprecedented, the level of success they had at such an early age.
What's going on, and welcome to Dear Culture, the podcast by, for, and about Black culture, the Blackness, all Black everything here on TheGrio Podcast Network. I'm your host, Panama Jackson, and I'm excited today to have a conversation that's been on my mind, heart, and soul for quite some time. And it's a conversation about one of my favorite artists and a person for whom a very lofty statement, a very high expectation bar has been set due to apparently her immense and tremendous skill set. She is considered an innovator. She is considered a one of one, I suppose. That's kind of the point of this conversation. She is, she's Brandy. And we're going to have a conversation today with a journalist and writer named Dai Poole, who's going to talk to us and break down for me and for us and for the culture, for the Blackness, why Brandy is considered to be the vocal Bible, which is a statement I would never want attached to my name. Not if I'm an artist still out here making music. But you know what? Sometimes you just are what you are. I'm excited to have this conversation today. Let me tell y'all a little reason why. I've been a Brandy fan for, I guess since I was 14 or 15. I am 42. That means me and Brandy basically grew up together. Now, my growth in life was a little bit different. She grew up rich and famous, and I didn't. But we are still brought together here today because I'm going to have a conversation about her being termed the vocal Bible, which is one of the more interesting statements I've heard about a singer, like, period. And to do this, I am joined by journalist, writer, music head, food writer. Interestingly enough, food writer, like your intersections are amazing, bro. Dai Poole, how you doing, bro?
I am doing well. Super grateful to be here.
We are glad to have you. Let me introduce you properly, and I want to talk about this food thing very briefly, just because it blew my mind. Like, I read all these articles. You wrote this thing about like Eggo, like waffles that are like tiramisu flavored, and I was like, wait, what? Anyway, so Dai Poole is a graduate of Virginia Tech who majored with degrees in psychology and music, which is a very interesting combination. But also, I actually think is the kind of thing that helps you be a good music writer in a very interesting way.
Absolutely.
Like, I feel like that intersection helps you be a good music writer. Self-proclaimed dessert connoisseur, or connoisseur, as I like to say. Lover of all things seafood, clearly a music head. Is written for Mashed, In the Kitchen, This is R&B, enjoys live music. You're all encompassing in all these different spaces. And you recently dropped, which makes this coincidental and perhaps ironic. You scripted a video about this very topic, about Brandy being a vocal Bible. Tell me how that came to be.
To be completely honest, I always just say when God blesses you with, you never know what things people are watching that you do. I had written an article. My first or second published article was actually 10 songs that justify why Brandy should be the vocal Bible for This Is R&B. It was like second publication. And PBS Soundfield, the producers there, found that article, and they asked me to help them script an upcoming series focused on her. It was the first time they were specifically focusing on an artist.
Okay. Brandy is a singer that producers can find their sound in.
As she was in the studio finishing up the production of Full Moon, Brandy found out that she was pregnant with her daughter, Sarai.
And
Hmm.
so it came at like the worst time of my life, but I was
Oh
like, I
no.
can't miss this opportunity. So it was super, super amazing.
Well, that's how we found you as well, honestly. Like I was
Really?
looking up Brandy Vocal Bible and your article popped up and I read it. It's the 10 songs that you say I think justify her being the vocal Bible. And I read this and I was like, this is interesting because I've heard this statement before. This statement is the reason why a couple of my friends and I got into a huge argument. Like it
Mm,
was like a 4-hour argument we had on the phone about whether or not Brandy was the actual vocal Bible. One of my boys was like, absolutely. The other one was like, absolutely not. I was in the middle, kind of like, like I'm interested in hearing the idea. Um,
hmm.
so that's how we found you as well. I saw that article and then
Awesome.
I saw the video that you scripted recently, and I'm like, man, look at God. Like this is right on time. I
Yes.
watched the whole thing. Good job, very good job.
Thank you.
Um, so let's hop right into this discussion. Like, what does it mean to be a vocal Bible? Like that is such an interesting statement in and of itself, but what does that even mean?
Yeah, so I think it's first important, if you don't mind, to give the context from which that moniker came. So
Please do.
songwriter Stacey Barth, I remember Brandy was working on a song called "I Don't Care" with her, and I believe the guy's name was Corey, on a writing team, and she said Brandy is the vocal Bible, and everyone kind of went with that statement. It was,
Is that where
I
that
think,
came
around the
from?
time her,
I was trying to figure
yeah,
out where that came from. Okay. All right.
yeah, I
Stacey
believe
Barth.
her
I
and
like
Ray.
Stacey Barth.
Yeah, they were working on that. I think it was the Family Business show on VH1, the reality
Okay.
show, and she was doing a song called "I Don't Care," and that's when we first heard that title. And I think, which we'll probably get into more about her own feelings about accepting that moniker. For me, it's similar to the idea of being the vocal blueprint, but I think that using the term, a biblical term, almost adds a level of reverence and respect to what she does because of the magnitude at which she does it. Like I love the biblical story about the many talents. And I always say, with Brandy, she's the perfect example of, if you're faithful over a few things, I'll make you ruler over many. Because she does it while she has her
Amen.
faults as a vocalist. She has her opportunities, I'll say, as a vocalist. There are things that aren't necessarily her skill set. Case in point, like Brandy's not a very loud singer. God didn't give her the gift of just volume that he gave maybe other people. However, with the things that he did give her, she chose to dive deeper and deeper and deeper into those gifts and expand them and stretch them to their fullest potential. And I think that's where the concept of the vocal Bible originated.
Begging and pleading, forgive me.
That's so interesting because for one, it's a more recent. I guess the Family Business album was like 2011ish or something like that, or whenever they
Yeah, it was
were.
really
I
early
don't.
2010s.
Yeah, yeah. So it was okay. So this idea of Brandy in that, like somebody, Stacy, let's say Stacy drops that term, and it's such a good term that it's bound to travel, right? Like that's the kind of thing that people are going to run with, and like, oh, we got to talk about this. And I like Brandy. It's interesting that you mentioned like what she doesn't do well. Like she's not a volume singer. Like she's not Patty, right? Like she ain't got that like like you hear Patty before you see her kind of thing. Like, but she ain't. But
Exactly.
Brandy's not like Janet, where it's kind of like whisper singing kind of thing. Like you're right. She lives very
Correct.
strongly in her mid register. She's very like she knows how to use that. She has a really solid low register too. Like there's
Hmm.
like this acapella song. I think you actually included in your list. I'm like, yo, the fact that
Yeah.
she can like hit those lower registers and do it in a way that like still fills up the sound of the cone of sound kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
I can appreciate that.
Something is missing. Somebody help me. Something is missing.
So, but here's the question: was there any? Do you think this could have applied to anybody else before Brandy gets labeled this, or is it, and I kept mentioning her like a one of one in the intro, and I think that's probably why because I've never heard that statement before, and it's only ever been associated with Brandy.
With her.
Like,
Yeah.
are there other artists that you feel like even came before her that could kind of have held such a weighty title? Because when I think of like, and this is going to lead to another question we're going to get to a little bit later. It's going to be a little
Sure.
controversial, but like I think of some of the great singers, obviously the Arethas and like the Minnie Ripertons.
Of
The
course.
people who have this ability to literally run the whole scale and all all this stuff. Like, are there any other people considering Brandy as this that could possibly fit on that Mount Rushmore with Brandy in this way?
I don't know if I would give someone the same title. I think maybe I'd give them different titles, but I definitely think that there are other vocalists who are exceptionally talented. Every generation has their gamut of vocalists who set a standard from which all other vocalists can aspire or reach to something about what they did. Like Aretha's ability to ooze soul into a song in a way that honestly prior to her, like, you have your Diana Rosses, you have the Motown sound, which was not in a disrespectful way lacking in soul for the intention of reaching a broader audience. Aretha really, or people like her, Ray Charles, Little Richard, they took that raw, churchy tent revival energy and channeled it into secular music and made it revolutionary in a way. And so, even looking at Brandy's contemporaries, I think if we are going to go under the assumption that artists like her or Monica kind of come from that school of Whitney Houston, who was also Whitney was a bridge between your Barbara Streisands and your Aretha Franklin's, is perfect
Yes.
balance. I think what Monica got from Whitney was a lot of that confidence, vocal confidence, as well as the volume that Brandy doesn't possess. And then Brandy was able to really borrow a lot of the isms and the nuances found in Whitney's tone. But I think what made Brandy unique and why she's gotten the title that she's gotten is for a current generation of singers, especially around Never Say Never in the Full Moon era. What we started realizing is that Brandy's style of recording in and of itself was becoming so unique and distinct in R&B that now it's commonplace. Like, you're not even thinking, oh, this was a style that Brandy was really working on revolutionizing. And then when you started adding her newer influences like Kim Burrell and Mariah Carey, you start hearing how complex the runs became, or how the vocal stacks, there was counterpoint. Like Janet Jackson's backgrounds are some of the best, along with Mariah Carey and Faith Evans on the female side. But Brandy was adding nuance and new layers to what they had already done. So that might be why I think Brandy's statue is here. And then other people do great things that they could, be on the thing for. Like, I mean, you could call Aretha the vocal architect, I guess. Like, she really revolutionized the way of singing for secular music.
No, you don't know me well. But listen, baby, it every little thing on the time was here.
So that's okay. And let's go ahead and just kind of hop into this, because I think one of the things that makes Brandy so unique is that vocal stacking, right? So, and you mentioned how influential she is. And this is kind of like a Solange point, and we're going to get to Solange at some point, because, Solange
Oh, yeah.
had a whole thing about this from some years ago that has always stayed with me, because I thought it was so fascinating. It's I think, piqued my whole Brandy as, we're going to get into this too, like, underrated, because I don't think she doesn't really get her due in this space. But so if Brandy's like this vocal Bible, and I think part of it, my idea on that is largely because of her runs, her ad libs, her runs, the way she stacks her vocals. Like, the more I started listening to that, and then the more I started trying to hear that in other places, like, I don't know how many people are able to stack vocals in the way that she does. And because she has such a unique tone, right? So her tone is one that is so like it's Brandy immediately. Like, there's no, and when people are trying to sound like Brandy, because I was listening to an artist, and this is no shade. I was listening to Kalani, and it was, I can't even think of the name of the song, but like, it's the opening song in the album. The album cover has her like standing on a ladder by like in a backyard fence kind of thing.
Oh, it was Right Until It Wasn't, that album.
Right, we take turns being wrong. I get real accountable when I'm alone. I get real about
The first song that comes on, my first thought was, oh, this is Brandy all day. Like, it's almost like she was trying to channel Brandy like 100%, like everything about the way it was. And I guess you're right. Like, the way that I hear a lot of artists now, the things that they are doing is something that I suppose Brandy has been doing, but I don't know if Brandy gets enough credit for that.
And Kalani is a self-professed Brandy fan, so it's like she's not
She
even
has to be.
hiding
clear.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's
it
had
has
because
to
I
be.
listened to her new album. The new album has a song up there. I think it's "Up at Night" with the one with Justin Bieber, and I heard it and I was like, "Ooh, these vocal stacks are very reminiscent of Brandy." But I know that she admires her, even her song "Distraction."
All right. So what specifically before we get into like some of the bigger broad scale questions, like, all right, I'm saying in my head when I heard that statement vocal Bob, I'm like, all right, it must be because of her tone, the way she stacks, like it's the kind of thing that you would want sonically on any album that you have because it gives so much like atmosphere, it gives so much emotion, so much soul. It's like all these things into it. But that's just me listening, but still kind of trying to understand the idea. But as somebody who has
Mhm.
spent time genuinely thinking about this enough to write about it and be part of other projects about it, like what makes her specifically the vocal Bible? Like what does she do that earns her this title?
Yeah, so it's a bunch of things. I think we'll go with the joking. I'm a church kid, so I grew up with
Me
different
too.
little acronyms for the Bible. One was basic instructions before leaving earth. And I think
Yes.
that might be the most applicable for Brandy. And I say
Okay.
that because the way that she goes about recording a record or a song or an album is so distinct that it lays this blueprint, going back to that word, for other artists to go to. And whether that simply be the vocal stacking, how she stacks her vocals, you know it's a Brandy record. Enya stacks her vocals, Sade stacks her vocals, but they're not the same as when Brandy stacks her vocals. Part of that is due to her tone and her ability to duplicate herself so accurately that I remember LaShawn Daniels spoke about when she used to do it back in the day. People thought it was like a plug-in or some extra effect, and it wasn't. It's just that her voice was so closely linked in those takes that it created this interesting sound. I think it's the fact that Brandy, what I always say is what makes her really different personally is the fact that every album that she goes through, she finds a new dimension of her voice to explore. And so many artists, they get to the point where they're like, I'm a great singer already. So they're not really trying to reinvent what they do or go deeper into their skill set. Brandy is consistently challenging herself as a vocalist, and I don't even think she does it with the intent of other people now do this. It's simply she's so curious as an artist. She doesn't approach her music like a singer. She approaches it depending on what she's doing it. She approaches it like an instrumentalist. She approaches it as a vocalist. She approaches it as a painter. There's all these different aspects of how she does everything where you're just sitting back. And I agree with you. The casual listener is probably not even taking in everything that she's doing, but that doesn't diminish how she approaches her art. And I think the reason that she gets the moniker Bible is because what she's doing, kind of, playing around with the Solange idea, is so sacred. And it's just like, this is such a Black expression of art. This is such a level of vulnerability. I think one thing that separates Brandy is you can always tell when Brandy's not actually plugged in to a song, because Brandy's gift is being able to take, and this is something I would give her credit, with the Whitney thing, is being able to connect to the words of a song and the emotion and display that through the voice. Not everybody can do that. I think Jasmine Sullivan is another great example.
Forget to come and pick up your feelings. Don't leave no pieces. You need to hurry up, pick up your feelings.
But like, there's not many people who
Preach.
connect the way that Brandy does. And so the fact that her voice allows her, if Brandy wants to say the bleeding wind, I don't know, making up something, the wind made me feel the blood on my shirt, she would sing it in such a way that the W in wind would actually produce a sound that you felt the wind hit you. That's just the way, I think they call it text painting. She does that in a way that's always believable. And it's just a level of nuance that most artists aren't really doing. And I think the funny thing about Brandy is I don't even know how much of it is intentional. It's simply that it's innate in her God-given gift that she's chosen to craft and be a good steward of throughout the years.
So that you said a bunch of stuff that like I could go in all these different directions. But
I
one
love
thing that
talking
it
about
really
Brandy.
stuck,
Sorry.
one really, I mean, but listen, it's true. One thing you said to me that really stood out to me was like this idea of like her using her voice as just kind of another instrument. Like she kind of approaches her music instrumentally, right? So like D'Angelo does that as far as like D'Angelo, I think uses his voice whenever we get a project, much just like an additional instrument. You know what I mean? Like it's what he's saying almost isn't as important as how he's getting across. Like he's a vocalist. Like literally the singing is kind of part of it, but how it's delivered is almost more
Mhm.
important. And I think Brandy can sing. So that's not a question at all.
Oh,
But saying it as saying it as she approaches it like a vocalist puts her more squarely in the artist camp than it does like the singer camp, right? Like it really
yeah.
like she's as involved in the creative process in the creation of these things, like taking those words and turning them into like these fuller lush ideas. And that's interesting to me because I don't know that I've ever thought of Brandy in the way of like I don't view her as like Michael Jackson was one of those artists, right? Like you're like he's literally what you're saying is the things that Mike is known for, right? Like Mike would go in there
Mhm.
and completely create an entire sound bed version of what he's trying to do, and then you kind of build around it, like the vocal stacking, the layering, all that stuff. That's what Mike did all the time. I mean, that's why his vocals, like just listening to the pure vocals, it's like I don't think we appreciate Michael Jackson enough for the things that he was doing musically. But I think now, the more that I think about it, I can probably make that same statement about somebody like Brandy, who innately maybe just goes in the studio like, you know what, I kind of hear it this way. Let me try to do this. Why do you think? And maybe I'm wrong. So let me go ahead and couch this with this. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Why do why don't more people view Brandy as the artist that perhaps she should be viewed as? If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
this no, it does. This is a question that I think I wrestle with a lot, and I've kind of stumbled upon these few ideas on it. So one, I think that her peers actually do respect her as the vocalist that
Yes,
she
I'm
is,
thinking
and that's
commercially because
something.
we're
Yeah,
gonna talk
yeah,
about the musicians because it seems like every
correct.
musician is like Brandy. Like everybody's like Brandy is
Yes,
about that life. I think from the commercial end of it though, like critically, I don't think that we give her the flowers critically. Like is
yeah,
Brandy might actually be an underrated artist. I think that's what I'm curious about. Like, how does
yeah.
that happen?
No, that's the distinction I want to make. Is that it's never her peers. It's the public at large, or maybe certain critics, or commercially. And I think it's a multi-tiered thing because her personal journey and her journey as an artist can't be separated from the decline. I hate to
Fair.
say the decline, but it's factual. The decline in commercial success. There were some missteps, I think, career wise, that impacted her commercial success. But I think now, when it comes to just artists in general, or the general fan base at large, one thing for Brandy is that I would say that maybe she could. I hate saying this about artists because it sounds like I'm telling them to dumb down things. But I think just generally as music has progressed deeper and deeper, and there's been the merge of rap and R&B, and singing as a art form has it's kind of gone from I listen to singers for them to do impressive things I can't do, to more so I want to be able to sing what the artist is doing, so the artists aren't doing things that are that impressive anymore. I think for an artist
Right.
like Brandy, that's challenging because I think at the peak of her creative or commercial success, Brandy's style of singing was almost conversational, and then it added all the great things. But as she has this pressure of the idea of being the vocal Bible, and her voice just naturally matured, she started doing even more aggressive or impressive things that maybe she couldn't do when she was younger. But now the times have changed. It's almost like the opposite. Brandy now sings closer sometimes as a 90s singer, because back in the 90s, it was how much can you do? How much can you add into
Right.
one song? And Brandy was an anomaly because that wasn't her style. She chose a different approach, similar to the way Aaliyah did. But then as Brandy's gotten older, now she can do the squawking and the bigger voice things and adding all these things. But unfortunately, the average listener is actually used to way a much more simplified vocal take, which is why I think songs like "Put It Down" were a common hit. Besides Chris Brown being on it, it was a hit for her because it was simple. Just that if you put it down right, like the way I want it.
Play it God's way, maybe we can fall in love. If you put it, if you put it down, if you put it, maybe we can fall in love.
Just a simple, easy to
Chris
follow
Brown makes
melody.
everything a hit, by the way. Chris
Of
Brown makes
course, of course.
everything
But like even the
everything a hit.
hook, the way Sean Garrett wrote that hook though, it's similar to like when Mariah's in her best and new age Mariah. It's like an easily sing along hook, something that people can sing along to. It gets stuck in your head and it's not complex. And I always say when Brandy finds that balance, I think sometimes the vocal Bible moniker can be a detriment because you feel like every song you have to attack, like give them everything I can, instead of, is this a good song, first and foremost, because Brandy could make the Itsy Bitsy Spider sound like a Grammy Award winning hit. And then it turns into, how can I convey what's necessary for this song, but do it in a way that the average person can walk away appreciating it? And that's hard I think it's hard for a person who thinks like Brandy, because the musical conversation she's having is at an elevated level. Not in saying this in a condescending way, it's just that the way that she studies or listens to music is just on a different level, probably from most everyday casual listeners, especially as when the things we listen on the radio are more and more simplified. So you
Yeah,
find
no,
that challenge of be the artist or be the commercial success. And that's a hard place to be in, I think, as an artist.
Yeah, and we're going to talk specifically about that. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Specifically, I want to talk about the critical successes. And actually, while you were talking, I had an idea about why I think maybe if there is a decline in interest in some ways, perhaps why I think that might be. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back here on Dear Culture to talk more about Brandy as the vocal Bible. All right, we're back here, Dear Culture, talking about Brandy as the vocal Bible with journalist, writer, music, foodie, all things considered, Dai Poole, who's been giving us some tremendous insights about Brandy, why she's the vocal Bible, what it is she does great, and how influential she's been. And we talked briefly before the break about this idea of what it means to be handed such a lofty title. And I mentioned that I wouldn't want the pressure of being called a Bible of anything because, a Bible it's the Bible. It's like the most read book on the planet as far as I know. Everybody's familiar, so everybody gives it this certain reverence. So what, and I read somewhere, like I read an article about Brandy being hesitant about accepting that title early on, and that makes sense to me. So what do you think it must, like, the pressure, like how has that pressure impacted the way Brandy delivers her music and her art? Like, how does Brandy work with being the vocal Bible?
Yeah, I wish that I'd personally spoken to her about this, but I can definitely piece things from what she said and make my own inferences. But one, she has publicly stated she struggled with understanding why people would call her that, struggling with coping with having it. I think she said her late vocal producer, one of the greatest, LaShawn Daniels, really was the person to help her understand why people refer to her that way. And, her understanding, it's beyond just her tone. It's not what Brandy does, it's how she does it. There's just a unique stamp that's on anything that other people might do the same thing, like you said before, and it just doesn't translate the same. But I think for Brandy, going to the pressures, I do think, and I would love to hear her thoughts, that sometimes subconsciously that type of pressure can seep into the way that you go about approaching your music. And sometimes you feel the need to live up to a moniker repeatedly, even when it's like, well, you don't have to do, and I'm not saying she does this consistently, but it's like, sometimes I'm like, you could make this simpler. Like, this actually could be more straightforward. Monica, I don't know if you remember the verses that they did.
I've been through that same thing.
Right.
But I mean, but when you're timeless, you can work at any time.
Come on now.
And I feel like you're timeless. Your voice is timeless. Your songs are timeless. So
Thank you.
One of my favorite parts was, one of my favorite parts when Monica and Brandy were discussing how they record music, Monica says, I just do a top down. Like, she sings through the song once or twice, and that's it. The raw emotion, capture it, and that's it. And it's actually a point that I thought Brandy could benefit from, only because Brandy is such a perfectionist. She's spoken about how, like, as a Brandy fan, there's like 50 versions of different songs sometimes. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah. I think Brandy could benefit from just trust your instinctual performance and don't go back and make it perfect. Because I think the Bible moniker brings a need to make it perfect, when sometimes, like her song Broken Hearted, which she recorded in like one take, most of it, because she wanted to go to like Six Flags or something, you felt that pain, you felt the rawness and the imperfection in the vocal performance. And I think she could benefit from knowing that, hey, when you actually do a take or two of a song, that's your true feeling. Don't feel the need to perfect that, because we actually as listeners feel that that impact.
You know, that's interesting too, because I think you can tell artists that like one take things and do that. Like a lot of times, like listening to Brandy, it's clear she's punching in things where they need to be. Like it's clear, and
Mhm.
that's not a knock or anything like that. It's just you
No,
can
yeah.
tell she has but beside the layering, just the phrasing, the way that these like songs like live on. I mean, the lyrics live on top of each other. Like it's I don't know how in the world she do some of that stuff in one take. But you bring up a good point. It'd be interesting to hear some of these songs as one take versions of themselves, right? Like how you just go the whole way through, or you just knock that thing out. Um, I You said something earlier about how Brandy like vocally was trying everything, and I almost wonder if that's part of her artistry too. Because so, for instance, I think Full Moon is probably regarded as her best album.
Yeah.
I think so. Like it's easily the album that I enjoy the most. So I'm gonna just assume that I'm the person that matters the most, is to say Full Moon is the best album.
I ain't even gonna lie. Since you walked up in the club, I've been giving you the eye. We can dance if you want.
It's
But
the album that gave her the moniker. I would agree that that's the one that people
yeah, that's
solidified
where I was
her.
going with this. Like that's where it came from. Like the stuff she was doing on an album, and it's also I think Brandy as an artist, which is real interesting because she's considered such a commercial success because she doesn't get to live in that indie artist like lane where I think she belongs sometimes with a lot of the things that she tries, because I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of her music, she takes risks and they don't always
Yes.
work, right? Like this, like musically, the sound she's going for, I think, was it What About Us, or I think What About, where she felt like this song was gonna be like innovative, like it could have changed the game kind of thing. Like
What about us? What about us?
like it was and what that song is amazing, but every song isn't going to be that way, right? And I wonder if the way
Yeah.
that she approaches vocals is also kind of the way she approaches the sound she's hearing. Like, you know, some artists just believe like I have these. She wanted to be a rapper, right? She thought she was going to change the game as a rap. B
Yeah.
Rocka is a thing, and I wish she would have gave B Rocka back, but she really believed in it for a while. You know what I mean?
Punchline, love, I'm not a shooting star. I'm stuck still in the sky. You can catch me on a mountain high. You can bless me with the right guy. You can put me in his eye line.
I guess I wonder if maybe, because I don't think people really talk about Brandy's albums the same way that they talk about classic albums, R&B albums. Outside of I think Full Moon and Never Say Never probably get closest to it.
Absolutely.
But the rest of the albums, like I've listened to all of them, Aphrodisiac, Human, B7, all these things, and I never really walk away with them feeling like this is, I'm not gonna say it's not the best version because they're good albums, they're fine. But you know, I feel like Brandy's one of those artists who is so big, you would think that almost all of her albums kind of have that, like her albums are events, but they're also because they're as good. And I wonder if her creativity vocally bleeds into the creativity musically, which doesn't always work. It works vocally almost all the time, but I think musically, maybe not. I've said a lot here.
No,
Am I
no.
off
I
base?
think there's the argument there. I definitely think there's a valid argument or critique what could be made, and we could get into that about does it always work. I think one of the album I look at the trifecta, the holy trinity of her albums as Never Say Never, Full Moon, and Aphrodisiac. That's the trinity for
Okay.
me. And I
Okay.
say that because I think Aphrodisiac unfortunately was clouded by a lot of personal turmoil. You know, that was when the situation with the marriage, or, you know, it wasn't real and all those different things, just negative media attention. And then some label choices and single choices. But like when you listen to that body of work, to me, it's like almost like the rated R of Rihanna's catalog. Like it's its own snapshot of Brandy at her most raw, Brandy emoting in a way that 16, 14-year-old, 18-year-old, 20-year-old Brandy could have never done. That's the Brandy that had wear and tear on her voice, so you could feel what she was saying. It wasn't overpolished the way that Full Moon was. And lyrically, it was mature. Songs like Necessary that CeeLo Green did, or songs like Say You Will.
Baby, all I wanna do is spend all my life with you. Have 3, 4 kids by you, and have some more if you want me to. I done gave up everything, so now
just had a level of maturity that should have actually transitioned her in adulthood. I believe it would have had it reached the heights that it should have. But then I think, bringing up your argument with Human, I thought Human was beautiful in its spiritual undertones and her ability to tap into her upper register and to play around with that. But I could see an argument where you say, production wise and songwriting wise, it went so pop and it didn't feel risk taking in terms of just subject matter or production, where it was kind of like, yes, she was risking by singing higher.
I'm only human. Forgive me. I'm only human. Love me. I'm only human. Save me from myself.
But that was all that there was. I could see an argument for that. I love the album, but I can find validity in there. And I think 211 kind of found this cool, icy, almost hip hop driven style. Like she found this way to like add some of the overproduction of like Full Moon with some of the rawness of Aphrodisiac. It was an interesting mix. In current time, and I don't think they knew how to market it the way that they should have. And then you have albums like B7 where it's this, I believe B7 is in the year like 2050, because song structure wise, one of my favorite commentators and vocal instructors online, O'Neal Gerald, he really talks about a lot of the song structure. And I was like, this is not like, oh, just play it in the car and listen to it casually album. It's a very like, besides maybe like 2 songs, you need to be listening, because she's doing stuff that, I mean, I would expect Bjork to be doing some of this type of stuff, but Brandy's not, like you said, an indie artist. She's looked at as a commercial entity.
Never ever cheat, never lie to me. I'm the most jealous girl in the whole wide world. Don't you ever hurry up.
Even her brand stock now, like she's acting again. She's doing stuff that she was doing in the 90s. So people are looking at her, but I think the music is still somewhat approached indie-like, if that makes sense, where it's just so creative. It's like, let's rein it in and make it package it so it's palatable for an everyday audience.
That is such an interesting way to look at it too, because she's almost too big to allow her music to be viewed perhaps the way it should. Like I think Beyonce also deals with this, right? Like Lemonade was a very indie album to me. Like it just like it felt a lot more personal, like smaller in some ways than like these big lush productions that are supposed to be like stadium fillers and stuff like that. But because she's Beyonce, it gets viewed in the can she sell 10 million lens, as opposed to the is the music landing the way that it should kind of stuff. And I think Brandy probably lives a lot in that space. And I never really thought about that until recently. I mean, it's been more recently thinking about her as an artist that it's like, I mean, even that like B7 opens up like a straight up like indie album. Like that first song, like I remember listening to that, like, yo, this is crazy. Like whatever instrumentation we got here, chopped up samples with some stuff. I was like, this is amazing.
I've been the Mississippi River, so cry me a river. I walk on your own water. Sorry for my time, for a long time.
And the references, but see, I think you brought up a good point with Beyonce's Lemonade album, for example, or even the self-titled album. The difference is, and of course there's differences in funding and backing, and like you said, just having that. Beyonce's an artist that if she drops it, people are going to pay attention, love it or hate it.
Right.
But I think Beyonce's packaging and presentation of Lemonade through a visual medium made it much, like people can't separate the two now. So it's like, even if you love or hate the album Lemonade, most people would say that the film was a masterpiece.
My daddy Alabama, mama Louisiana. You mix that Negro with that Creole, make a Texas Bama.
And because she's smart, and she's smart enough to know that if I present it in a way that people intrinsically think about the album and the visual, it'll make the two things synonymous in most people's minds. And Brandy doesn't often, and I say this respectfully, Brandy, in my opinion, never was a visual artist in the way that she should have been. And so she only has the music. So as the music gets more and more indie, I like using the word indie for this. I don't know why. I like how you'd use that. It actually became more and more challenging because she doesn't have the other component. And a lot of indie artists today, like Dawn Richards or, Isla or Moses Sumney, they're all very visual artists. Samo, like all these different people make
Yeah.
cool music, innovative music, but they also have a visual component to make it accessible and digestible.
We're gonna take a final break here. To come back and finish talking about Brandy as a vocal Bible. I have one final question to kind of wrap this up, and then we're gonna do some. We're gonna close it out with some black fashions and some black recommendations because at Dear Culture we're all about the blackness. So stay tuned. Join us after the break. All right, we're back here at Dear Culture, and we are finishing up this conversation with Dai Poole about Brandy's The Vocal Bible. And what do you think Brandy's ultimate musical legacy will end up being? Like, I think the Vocal Bible thing and all, look, she's a people say she's like your favorite artist. I think that bears out. You can find quotes on quotes from days from artists that we know and love who are like, I love Brandy. The Luke James of the world, the Indy Aries of the world, like this all and it runs the gamut of the type of artist. Like everybody loves Brandy as an artist. But I feel like there's that, kind of a bit like the commercial side versus the artist side versus what kind of music she's making. Like, so Brandy she has a legacy. It's set in stone. She is Brandy. She's on one name status, right? She got there. What do you think her musical legacy is going to be?
This is tough because
I know that's a heavy question. I wanted to lay the whole thing before.
Tell us the secrets, the answers of life. I definitely believe that she will be remembered by the tone of her voice and how unique it was. You can't discuss 90s music, not just R&B, 90s music without talking about Brandy. Because what she, along with Aaliyah and Monica, did was truly unprecedented, the level of success they had at such an early age. But I think Brandy, as a full-on entertainer, I don't think her best days are behind her. I think as we see her transitioning into acting more, I don't know what the musical side will look like, moving forward, but I definitely think as a talent, she's definitely going to be remembered as a Renaissance woman, as someone who did it all and did it all in a way that was uniquely her. And I think the more that she taps into accepting her authentic self and not wanting to be anybody else other than that, the more that people will resonate with her work. And I pray that people look back at albums like Full Moon, Never Say Never, Aphrodisiac, and her debut and look and think, this really set the groundwork for 21st century R&B music. You wouldn't have the same thing with Frank Ocean's and stuff without Brandy.
I love Frank Ocean. That is a whole separate interesting conversation. And I would love to see Brandy go like the Frank Ocean Blonde route. Like Blonde is probably like my favorite album of the past decade. Like I can listen to that album every single day. I would love something super minimal, but like super like punchy and like powerful. Like, I mean, Frank Ocean is a gift into himself, just his phrasing and the way that he puts things together. Like
and they've worked together before.
Like that, but just like the minimalism on that album. Listen, Frank need to go ahead and run him a whole Brandy album. Just like let me start at the top. Let's do this.
I think he was one of her first placements.
I would love that.
Yeah, I think like he worked with her on Human and then on 211. So I would co-sign that times 10. Get back together.
Listen, I want to hear Blonder.
Yes,
the Brandy version. That's what I want to hear. This has been a great conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. You gave a lot of great insights and ideas. We said this off camera, but like thinking of Brandy as an indie artist, I think reframes her whole career. And I think I'm gonna start trying to do that. I'm gonna start trying to listen to her album through that indie lens, like because I do think with the commercial end of it, because she's a selling artist. She's a selling artist. You know what I mean? Like people, I think it's easy to lose her influence just from a critical standpoint because people view these big artists as just like they only view like the influence in terms of, I don't think the musical influence gets enough credit when you start looking at artists that are as big as like we're going to be talking about like what Beyonce is so big, like people are going to be trying to figure out exactly how she influenced things aside from just being the biggest artist ever, like the ability to level things up like Michael Jackson. I think you have to be more intricate about thinking about how they influence music and what they did and how that those breadcrumbs are sprinkled through everything. So, I'm gonna start trying to think and do more of my own work with Brandy in that sense. And shout outs to Brandy, the whole Norwood family. Those are my people. True story. I want to write Ray J's biography. That's my goal in life, to be the person that writes Ray J's biography. So, hopefully they listen to this and they get it.
Yes, I'm speaking that into existence.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to move into this. It's one of my favorite things to do here because, we all have this statement where we say black people are not a monolith. We are all individuals. We do things. And, well, we do this thing here called a black fashion. And this is our opportunity to prove it every single time. Black fashions being a confession of sorts of your blackness, something that most black people that we think anyway would all kind of share in common or think similarly. But as it turns out, that's not always the case. You have a black fashion for us.
I
Please
do.
share.
I have never seen Love Jones, Love and Basketball, or Friday. You actually wrote a movie. You wrote an article about New Jack City, and I was like, I actually have never seen that either. So, yeah.
So, I want to be upset about this. I really do. But you know what I'm learning the more we do stuff like this is how many black movies black folks haven't seen. Like, Friday comes up all the time amongst people. People are all like, yeah, I've never seen Friday. Like, Love Jones is surprising, but not surprising when you consider how little money it actually made, like at the box office or like in, like it's like a indie film darling that everybody loves and references. Like everybody knows what happens in Love Jones, even if you've never seen it, right? I think it kind of ascended to that. You have no idea. Okay. All right. Well, just threw that whole idea out the window. Okay. All right. Got me cussing on a Tuesday. All right. So you haven't seen Love Jones, Love and Basketball. That's so interesting. Why?
This is what I tell people.
Because at this point, it's a choice.
So
It's
at
a
this
choice
point,
at
I
this
almost is it a part of my identity to just keep being this anomaly in the black community? Like, because I did eventually watch The Color Purple, so like I have broken some ones that I hadn't seen, but I always argue this. I was raised in the 2000s. Like I had no business watching any of those movies as a young kid in the 90s. So it's like when I was
Fair.
of age to watch it, I had my own stuff to watch. Like we had our own movies and things that we would want to watch. So I just never made it back to watching it. But, it's nothing against them personally. I think that they're probably incredible.
You don't have any curiosity about like even Love Jones or, Love and Basketball. I mean, Friday, but Love Jones is like Love Jones.
I don't wear drawers.
You don't have any on right now.
Breaking it
Wave goodbye to your daddy, baby.
and putting it all together.
This is nothing serious.
No curiosity.
I think I have so much admiration and respect for all the
okay.
actors in that film. It's just never been something that I was like, let me go run and see what Love Jones is about. It's just never been. Maybe I'm also not the biggest romance drama movie person. I'm pretty cynical a lot of times when it comes to
Okay.
romantic love. But maybe one day it'll come on. Like when I would watch cable, that's how I saw the sequels to Friday, because they would come on VH1 or something like that. So maybe one day if I'm sitting at home.
So you've seen Next Friday.
One of
or
those.
Friday
I don't know
After
which
Next.
one. And because everyone kept calling, because my nickname is Day Day, and there's a character named Day Day. So I watched that just because I had to understand the reference to why everyone kept saying that to me. So.
All right. Well, that is what at one point in my life I would consider that to be an alarming black fashion, but it turns out I'm not even sure that's a black fashion anymore. I might have to tell people, listen, if you're just gonna tell me you ain't seen Friday or Love Jones, you got to come up with something
Thank
else. Because
you.
at this point, I'm starting to think nobody's actually seen the movies except
Thank
me and my
you.
friends. But to counter this potential travesty in your blackness, we also do something called a Black Accommodation, which is where we ask people to share something in blackness that's by for about black culture or black people that they like and they really enjoy. So, what is your Black Accommodation?
Yeah, so like I'm a political junkie. I enjoy being engaged and informed as possible when it comes to the political space. I need to add that as a writer, like to get into writing about it. But there is an incredible political commentator. She was actually the national press secretary for Bernie Sanders' campaign, Brianna Joy Gray. She does an incredible podcast called Bad Faith. So that it's like an episode every Thursday for free, and then Monday she does premium episodes for people on her Patreon. I recommend checking it out. I think as a Black woman, that voice and that lens is often underrepresented, and she does a great job of discussing not just the racial angle of things, but more importantly, the class angle and fusing the two. So I definitely recommend checking out her work. She's incredible. I love hearing her viewpoint on things.
Well, look, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for joining us here. Where can people find your work? Where is Dai Poole? Where can they be part of the
Thank you so
conversations
much.
that you're having? And I didn't bring up the tiramisu thing.
Yeah.
You wrote about tiramisu like waffles, and I'm just not.
Believe it or not, my biggest article so far, I think, for that publication was actually about the proper way to open up ketchup packages, which is the funniest thing to me because I wrote that in like 15 minutes. I thought it was a joke. So, yeah.
Life hacks, man. People
Yeah,
love a good
but
life hack.
I'm on Instagram. That's like my preferred social media platform at DAI_TYME. That's daytime. Does have my website in the bio where you can check out my articles for the kitchen, mash.com. Adding This Is R&B. I'm trying to add some more publications as well. So I appreciate it if you check it out.
Look, I appreciate the convo. You have a lot of great things to say, so I'm sure we'll be hearing, reading a ton more from you on all manner of things because, listen, we found you. I saw it. I was like, we need to get this chap here to talk about this Brandy thing. And listen, we appreciate the conversation. That's going to do it for this episode of Dear Culture this week. Thank you for listening to Dear Culture. If you like what you heard, please give us a 5-star review, subscribe. Wherever you listen to your podcast, check us out. Hang out with the folks. You know what I'm saying? We talk about the blackness and all things black, all black everything. Please email all suggestions, email scams, gift cards, but digital gift cards, compliment suggestions, ideas, but make them very short. We're not going to take them. So, I have my own to podcast@thegrio.com. Dear Culture is an original production brought to you by the TheGrio Podcast Network. Our show is produced by myself, Panama Jackson, and Crystal Grant, and edited by Cameron Blackwell. And Regina Griffin is our managing editor of podcasts here at the TheGrio Podcast Network. So thanks for sleepwalking. Thanks for checking us out. Have a black one. Next week on Dear Culture, Anthony Anderson.
While the Obamas were in office, I took a USO trip to Afghanistan.
Okay.
And we flew over on Air Force 2, which was, I believe, the First Lady's plane.
Okay. Didn't even know that existed, by the way.
Yeah, Air Force 2. And I was going through the cabinets, and this is when I knew that we had a black first family. There was packets of grape Kool-Aid in the cabinet.